talking about the Jason Van Dyke trial yet again here on the Law and Crime Network. The reason is because he's been transferred all the way from Illinois, where he was tried and convicted in the shooting death of Laquan McDonald, from there all the way to Connecticut on the East Coast. And in the process of moving, he was attacked. He was beaten. And his wife says the reason he was beaten is because of who he is, a police officer. Not surprisingly, she was fearful of this when she testified at his sentencing hearing. We're going to be talking about this for a while and exactly what danger he may be facing in prison. First, though, Jason Van Dyke on the witness stand. In that murder trial, Jason Van Dyke here tells his own story.
What were you trying to do at that point when you got around that other squad car?
We're trying to keep him from continuing heading eastbound on that southeast angle and to enter into another business.
What was the other business?
The other business was a Dunkin' Donuts.
So you're trying to block him from the Dunkin' Donuts as well, correct?
Correct.
And did Officer Walsh, did he eventually park the car?
He did. He parked it on a southwest angle, straddling the lines.
And was that right in front of the Dunkin' Donuts?
I believe so, yes.
As you were driving around that car before you parked, were you looking back at Laquan McDonald?
Yeah, I was looking at him over my right shoulder.
And at any point did you see him?
At this time, your past preliminaries, Mr. Ruber, stop bleeding. Sustained.
What, if anything, did you see Laquan McDonald do as you're driving around?
He kept on coming towards us.
Right. Before you parked, did you see him do anything?
Well, no. All I could see, I could see him starting to push up with his left hand off the ground. I see his left shoulder start to come up. And I still see him holding that knife with his right hand, not letting go of it. And his eyes are still bugged out. His face has got no expression on it.
During that time on the ground, did you say anything to him?
I'm yelling at him, drop that knife.
How many times do you think?
I couldn't tell you.
Those words from Jason Van Dyke on the witness stand during his own murder trial did not ultimately help him. Attorney Ann Bremner, let me ask you about this. Oftentimes we say that the fastest way to go to prison is to get up and take the stand in your own defense.
Right.
It basically was true here as well.
Absolutely. But I was thinking while I was listening to him, I've defended police officers for decades, Seattle Police, Portland, Chicago. And we have inquests here in police shootings, so we actually have a jury, regardless if it's criminal or not, ultimately. And when they talk about someone coming at them with a knife, they're trained in this film called Surviving Edge Weapons, a 21-foot rule that the time it takes you to get your weapon out is the time it takes someone to kill you with a knife if they're within 21 feet. So in listening to him, I thought, he sounds like a lot of police officers I've defended over the years who were found not to be responsible and were never charged criminally.
Well, it sounds like maybe you should have been defending him then, because I don't remember this being very, very clear during the original trial. I know that they tried to color it that way, but, where was the reenactment? The easy way to portray that evidence is to get someone there in the courtroom and kind of mask it out and say, and I know they did a little bit of that to try to gauge the distance, but look, I would have liked to have seen more evidence from that. And again, we look at the dash cam video of this actual episode going down here. We've seen it at full speed. We've slowed it down. We've looked at it many times over again. I mean, was he really coming at him with a knife, or was he starting to try to swerve away?
Right, and that's the thing. When you have an officer, obviously, that is contradicted by his own video cam or dash cam or body cam, that's a huge problem. And any of my officers, I make sure they see everything in the case before they get on the stand. But I've never had an officer charged criminally. In this state, malice is required to even charge somebody. I mean, that's going to be the law that's coming into effect. So, I'm sorry, it used to be malice had to be proved, and now they're changing it to exclude that requirement. It's been tough to prosecute police officers in my state. But the fact is, if there's contradictory evidence, I mean, he's going to get up there, and where's his credibility go?
Good question. Okay, we're going to listen to some dueling use of force experts now, one from the state, one from the defense, trying to say this either was justified or it wasn't.
As a use of force expert, was that an appropriate action by those officers calling for the taser?
I think so, yes. I think the officers in general on present were acting appropriately, restricting his movement, hemming him in, trying to isolate him to an area that was not populated.
When you viewed People's Exhibit number 8, and I'm not going to play it again, but did you note the short time period from when Officer Van Dyke's vehicle arrived and when you first visibly observed shots being fired at Laquan McDonald?
Yes, it was very short.
And based on your expertise as a use of force expert, you indicated that one thing that officers are required to do is to assess the situation. Is that correct?
Yes.
Based upon reviewing this case and those actions of Officer Van Dyke, the short time period, and exiting his vehicle and firing his gun at Laquan McDonald, do you have an opinion regarding that behavior and the decision to shoot Laquan McDonald?
Well, police officers have to get out of their vehicles. My issue with Officer Van Dyke is his decision to shoot. It was not, at that moment in time, in those circumstances, the standard imminent risk of serious injury or death was not present, and the use of deadly force was not necessary at that point in time.
That was one use of force expert on the stand in the Jason Van Dyke case, where that officer from the Chicago Police Department was accused of killing Laquan McDonald, a teenager armed with a knife. Now for the opposing view.
So I looked at the video. I looked at the Chicago Police Department officer-involved shooting investigation. I've read numerous interview transcripts from involved officers. I've read the autopsy report. I've read Dr. Miller's analysis of Officer Van Dyke. I reviewed Dr. O'Donnell's toxicology report. I reviewed Dr. T's, if I'm correcting her, I reviewed her report. I've had a lot of contact with Mr. Jason Freeze as he developed his recreation animation. And I think that about covers it.
Okay. And I'm sorry, if you can go ahead and speak to your opinion with respect to the second volley of shots.
So I wasn't sure. So I was given additional information. I read Dr. Miller's report. I had a telephone interview with Officer Van Dyke. And based upon those two additional sources of information, I rendered an opinion that the second volley, that Officer Van Dyke was still under imminent threat by his observations, and I felt that that was a reasonable conclusion.
And when you say by his observations, did you determine that his observations were reasonable for a police officer in that same situation?
In dealing with a lot of these prior cases that are captured either on an officer's body camera, which isn't a situation here, or with the car cam, they very rarely show what the officer is actually seeing or what the actual lighting conditions are that the officer's eye is seeing. You know, the cameras will pick up different lighting variations, and the shutter on a body cam will show light situations that are more favorable. So what answered my question was having Officer Van Dyke tell me what he was looking at when he decided to fire that second volley.
This is one of these situations that gets really tricky to sit an armchair quarterback, to look back at what Officer Van Dyke was thinking and seeing when he pulled the trigger and shot and killed Laquan McDonald in Chicago. And Bremner, you're still with me here. So look, this is something that cuts a little bit near and dear to me because I do a lot of photography on the side. And look, that expert is right. Cameras that are facing one direction see lighting that faces in one direction, and Van Dyke was looking the opposite direction from the camera in this footage. So is it possible that he was seeing different things and perceiving different things?
Well, absolutely, and you're spot on. You're also spot on the armchair quarterback, because that's the United States Supreme Court standard in Graham versus Connor on use of force. You don't sit as an armchair quarterback with 20/20 hindsight and evaluate police officers' use of force. They make split-second decisions, and you have to look if they're objectively reasonable in using that use of force. And part of that, of course, is looking at that officer's perspective, not what the cameras may show or may not show what he saw, like he just said, but whether or not he felt justified, he felt threatened. He felt threatened with deadly force at the time he elected to discharge his firearm.
Well, there's an objective and there's a subjective standard here, so certainly that objective standard is one of the things jurors had issues with here. We're going to take a break and come back with more analysis of the Jason Van Dyke case in a moment. Chicago police officer Jason Van Dyke found guilty of second-degree murder for shooting and killing Laquan McDonald, an African-American teenager in Chicago who was wielding a knife. Officer Van Dyke shot him 16 times, and that led to a conviction on second-degree murder and also a series of other charges, one for each shot fired. Ultimately, at sentencing, all of those charges collapsed into the murder charge, so Van Dyke was only sentenced on the murder itself. That was the judge's decision. It came after a lengthy sentencing hearing where other individuals who had dealt with Officer Van Dyke got up on the witness stand and told the judge they didn't like the way he treated them either.
Who's he?
Jason Van Dyke.
How did he pull you out of the car?
He grabbed my arm and pulled me out.
What happened to you when the defendant pulled you out of the car?
He pulled me out of the car and grabbed my left arm and slugged me around the car and threw me face first on the car and then put a handcuff on my arm, and then he grabbed my other arm and he pulled it around and put the handcuffs on both my arms.
After he put handcuffs on both of your arms, what happened after that?
He said, "What the fuck is wrong with you, motherfucker? I told you to get out of the car." And I asked him, what you stopped me for?
Did he respond?
Yeah, he said something, but...
Were you in pain, physical pain when that happened?
Yes.
Where were you feeling pain?
My arms.
And would you describe that pain? Was it severe? Was it minor? How bad was that pain?
I didn't know what had happened to my arms, but I was, it hurt very bad. You know, I couldn't move my shoulders. I couldn't move nothing.
Did you tell the defendant that you were in pain? He was hurting you?
Yes.
Did he respond?
He said, "Shut up and lay down."
This was just one of several witnesses who made it very clear up on that witness stand that they did not like the way this officer, Jason Van Dyke, was treating them during official stops, official business. Let's listen now to how that particular witness described the lingering effects of his encounter.
Emotional pain, psychological pain as well, correct?
Yes.
How have the actions of Jason Van Dyke on July 9th affected you emotionally?
I can't sleep at night. I sleep for about an hour and a half, and I get up. And I eventually try to go back to sleep. I got anxiety and PTSD. I had brought back a lot of stuff. And ADD. I can't focus. So it's nothing. It brings back a lot of stuff. I just try to deal with it. I see a couple psychiatrists, one at the VA, one outside the VA. I see a couple psychologists to talk to them. I have biofeedback at the VA. I got I take hydrocodone for the pain. I take ibuprofen for my pain. I take muscle relaxer. I take an anxiety pill twice a day. I take a depression pill twice a day. I take an ADD pill 3 times a day.
Difficult testimony there from an individual who says Jason Van Dyke was very rough with him during a routine stop. Attorney Ann Bremner, we're talking about this case again because Van Dyke is behind prison walls himself for pulling the trigger against Laquan McDonald, the African-American teenager who was wielding a knife. Look, this testimony is not really much of a surprise because Van Dyke had a record of, 20-some complaints, lawsuits, payouts, internal discipline matters. How does one rack up that many complaints and remain carrying a gun and a badge?
It's virtually impossible, I think, in this day and age. It's really shocking. I mean, you just don't see that in this day and age, with officers with that many. I mean, they would be terminated. But, of course, it depends on the breadth and the seriousness of each one of those. You might have something on conduct on becoming an officer that might be using foul language or something like that, or you could have a very serious use of force. So all of those things need to be looked at. And, of course, there's strong unions for police officers that will fight these kinds of things.
Exactly, and the union is very strong in Chicago. The union stuck up for this guy all the way through, all the way to the end. They said that it was a travesty, that it would basically make it difficult for officers to do their jobs. Is that ring true to you? You've worked on these cases.
The officers I've worked with, and I've worked with police officers for decades, I mean, since I left the prosecutor's office, and what they want to see are the good officers. They don't want to condone bad behavior. They don't want to be a part of that. In fact, when you have an officer that's done something really errant, you don't see a lot of officers supporting them. I mean, you might have seen that decades ago, but you don't really see that today, at least in Seattle. So it's unusual, I think, for a union to stand by somebody that is pretty indefensible with that kind of a record.
Chicago's a different kind of town, and we're going to be back with you in a couple of minutes. Up next, as we review testimony in this case, Tiffany Van Dyke, the wife who said she was fearful for Jason Van Dyke's safety. Her fears came true behind prison walls this week. Her testimony at that sentencing hearing when we return here on Law and Crime. Chicago police officer Jason Van Dyke convicted of second-degree murder and other charges for shooting and killing Laquan McDonald, an African-American teen armed with a knife. McDonald, after conviction, was housed in a prison in Illinois. He was transferred to Connecticut, probably for safety reasons. He's in a federal prison in Connecticut, even though these are state charges back in Illinois. Bottom line, he was attacked, beaten, within hours of arriving at that federal prison. His wife, during his sentencing hearing, said she feared for his safety, and it looks like those fears came true. Let's listen to Tiffany Van Dyke on the witness stand.
Can you describe what it's been like coming into this courthouse for Jason's trial?
To come into this courtroom for Jason's trial was one that my husband prepared me for. He told me, this is how things are going to go. It's going to be scary. People are going to be screaming at you, screaming at me. They're going to be saying very foul, inhumane things, calling my husband a murderer. My husband is not a murderer. Calling him all these vile things over and over again, repetitively. Threats to his life. A sniper threatening to take my husband out. Him having to make sure that myself, my father-in-law, and him have to wear bulletproof vests to come and go from a public courthouse so that way we are safe was very shocking to me. It broke my heart. My husband was more afraid of my life and my father-in-law's life than his life. I was afraid every day coming in and out of this courthouse that somebody willing to shoot and kill my husband.
And that was because of threats?
That was because of threats. I'm afraid every day, every single day. I go to bed praying that he is safe and praying that he will come home.
What do you have to say to the McDonald family?
I do have to say, we do pray every single day for your family. It was a tragedy. This was not something that was hateful. This was not something other than my husband doing his job, what he was trained to do. We pray every single day for this family, for my family, for your family, for everybody, for the entire city of Chicago to have peace. That's all we want. We want both sides to have peace.
And Tiffany, finally, do you have anything else you'd like to say to the court before your husband is sentenced?
I do. I would like to ask the court to please take into consideration that my husband is a man. He's a human being. He was a very good, dedicated officer. He's a very good, loving husband, a very good, loving father. He has paid the price. He has paid the ultimate price. He will no longer be a police officer. He will no longer be able to gain any form of employment that will be able to help support my family. His life is over. Please, please. He has paid the price already. My heart and soul are broken. They will not be mended until he comes home. My children will not rest and not be safe until he comes home. He has paid the ultimate price.
Those words from Tiffany Van Dyke, the wife of Jason Van Dyke, upon the moment of his sentencing. It was during that hearing that the judge determined the length of Jason Van Dyke's sentence on a second-degree murder conviction for shooting and killing Laquan McDonald, that African-American teen in Chicago who was armed with a knife. Attorney Ann Bremner is with me here on the Law and Crime Network. So, Ann, mixed reaction to that soliloquy, if we can call it that, from the wife, because it's clear that she's very concerned about her husband, but she also had some rather bizarre language, in my opinion, saying that he paid the ultimate price for this. Well, he didn't. Usually the ultimate price is paid by someone who dies for a cause or who loses his or her life. And Jason Van Dyke was not the one laying there bleeding on the pavement. It was Laquan McDonald. What's your reaction to what she said?
I had the same reaction, at least on that portion of it. When we ever talk about the ultimate price, we're talking about a victim who's died. I mean, that is the ultimate price. I thought, though, on the other hand, she was pretty compelling in terms of saying his life is over, because a lot of times with police officers, you know, that their life is over if they're no longer police officers. You know, it's kind of this thing that's really what they live for. And so I found that to be something that I've seen in other cases, you know, in police cases. And the anguish she feels for the family, I mean, and for his safety and everything else, and especially her vitriol to media. I found that to be kind of the most emotional part of what she had to say.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you have nobody left to blame, you, of course, blame the media. We see that all the time here. And look, I'm a big boy, and I was told years ago to have skin as thick as a rhinoceros if I'm going to do this job. But look, I mean, my job is to question what people who cloak themselves with governmental authority do. It's why we fought a revolution in this country, and it's why we have a free press. And I sit here and I say, why did one officer pull the trigger and no other officer there did? So why does she get to sit there and bash people like me and then say her husband was a good cop when he was the only one that pulled the trigger? Were the other ones bad cops?
I know. I was thinking of Thomas Jefferson. He said, I'd rather be governed by newspapers and the media than by the government, you know, because that's a policing quality that the media has, to make sure to ask all the right questions, to make sure that you uncover things about unlawful use of force and police misconduct. So, I mean, that's exactly what you should be doing in a case like that, and that's not something that she liked, obviously.
Exactly. And we're going to talk with you again here coming up in the next hour here. First, we want to remind you folks what's coming up in the next hour here on the Law and Crime Network. We're going to be talking about the McStay family murder case. That's the case where defendant Chase Merritt is facing murder charges, of course, and a possible death penalty because he's accused of killing a family of 4, his business associate and that associate's family. Okay, let's take a quick break.